Imagine a world where the unspeakable became a daily reality, a world where the powerful held absolute control over the powerless. Now, take a journey back in time with us as we unveil the shocking and hidden truths about what masters did to slaves in ancient Rome. Well, brace yourselves, for this is a story that history has tried to bury, but we will unearth it together. Chapter 1. Life as a Roman Slave. Was it all just whips and chains? Picture this. You're a Roman slave, but it's not all bad news. Sure, you're not living your best life, but you've got options. There's a pecking order, my friend. At the top, you've got the lucky ones, the brainy slaves. These are the folks who advise Rome's elite, kind of like having your own personal Google for life's tricky questions. Some of them are Greeks, and the Romans thought Greeks were the bee's knees until they decided to, well, conquer them. Ouch. Next up, we've got the domestic divas. These slaves are personal servants, servers, kitchen magicians, and cleanliness experts. If you were a Roman with a bit of cash, owning one of these slaves was like having your very own butler or maid. Talk about living in style. Now let's not forget the workers on those big farms, quarries, and mines. They had it rough, no doubt about it. Their lives were short, tough, and often miserable. But hey, you can't build an empire without breaking a few slaves, right? And then there's the absolute worst gig, being a galley slave or a miner. Galley slaves were chained to benches, rain or shine, and left to their own devices. When things got dicey, they were the first to walk the plank. Not exactly a dream job, huh? Life as a miner wasn't a walk in the park either. Imagine digging in the depths of the earth, unaware of the dangers of lead poisoning from all that lead Rome loved to use. Safety regulations, not a thing back then. Now let's talk about something serious. If you were a slave and you dared to escape, or if your master had a bad day and you crossed paths with their anger, well, brace yourself. Punishments ranged from a severe whipping to public execution. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Stay with us because there's a glimmer of hope for these unsung heroes. Some slaves, like gladiators or skilled entertainers, managed to achieve a level of popularity that rivals today's pop stars. Yeah, they were the Roman rock stars, but even they weren't truly free. Freedom was a distant dream for most slaves, especially those who were born into it or had been slaves since childhood. Imagine someone having to explain to you what freedom even means. Crazy, right? Chapter 2. The Brutality of Roman Slavery. So here's the deal. Romans had this knack for being, well, let's just say creative when it came to punishments. First up, we've got crucifixion. You've probably heard about it, especially if you know a guy named Jesus. But did you know that thousands, maybe even millions of folks got nailed to a cross by the Romans? Yeah, it was like their go-to punishment. Imagine hanging there, unable to breathe, while folks casually strolled by. Not a fun way to spend a Sunday afternoon, right? Now, drowning wasn't just for sailors who fell overboard. Nope, the Romans decided it was a swell way to execute folks too. Imagine struggling to breathe as water fills your lungs. Yikes! Exposure in extreme weather, brutal whippings and shock, all popular methods to meet your maker in ancient Rome. It's like they had a twisted menu of torture. But wait, it gets worse. Ever heard of overseers? These were fellow slaves who were kind of like the hall monitors from hell. They were the ones tasked with keeping everyone else in line. So if you think your boss is bad, imagine your annoying coworker suddenly having the power to whip you into submission. Ouch! Now let's talk about escape. You'd think breaking free would be the ultimate dream, right? Well, not always. Many slaves had been slaves since they were kids, and they didn't really know what freedom was. So sometimes they'd rather stick around Rome, even if it meant a life of misery, than risk a gruesome end on the run. Chapter 3. The Arena of Blood, where blood sport was. You see, Colosseums weren't just places for epic gladiatorial showdowns. They were arenas of pure mayhem. Imagine stepping into a stadium where you'd not only witness fights to the death, but also executions, all in the name of amusement. Now, the Romans didn't just stop at one way to kill someone. They had options. Crucifixion, check. Feeding people to lions? Check. Trampling them with elephants? You betcha. They even got creative, wrapping unlucky souls in pitch-covered linen and setting them on fire. Ouch. But wait, there's more. The Colosseums were also places for historical reenactments. Want to relive a glorious battle from the past? No problem. Just dress some poor slaves up as former enemies and watch them reenact the whole thing. Spoiler alert. It doesn't end well for the actors. Oh, and speaking of actors, if you thought Hollywood was the birthplace of famous performers, think again. Roman brothels had their own stars, and I'm not talking about celestial bodies. Some prostitutes became rich and famous, catering to the desires of the elite. But don't get it twisted. These ladies, and sometimes gents, were still slaves, no matter how fancy their clientele. Now, you might be wondering, who in their right mind would cheer for such gruesome acts? Well, the Romans did. People in the stands would cheer, applaud, and believe it or not, even place bets on who'd survive. Talk about a wild crowd. Chapter 4. The Real House Slaves of Rome. Okay, not every slave revolt was a blockbuster like Spartacus, but let's talk about that one first. It's 73 BCE, and a gladiator named Spartacus decides he's had enough of fighting for his life in the arena. He gets a few buddies and they make a run for it. Soon, their group balloons into a full-blown rebellion. They even defeat Roman legions. Yeah, you heard that right. And they're partying like it's 71 BCE. But guess what? The Romans weren't about to let their slaves have a happy ending. They hunted Spartacus down, and he met a grisly fate, but his story became legend. Now, for the not-so-Hollywood revolt. See, most slaves knew that rebellion meant you were toast, but sometimes they couldn't take it anymore. They'd steal some weapons, maybe torch a building, and the Romans would come down on them like a ton of bricks. And here's the kicker. The punishments were brutal. They'd crucify you, toss you to the lions, or make you fight other slaves to the death for the amusement of the Roman elite. Not exactly a fun way to spend a Saturday night, right? So, while these revolts showed some gutsy resistance, they usually ended with a gruesome spectacle. But hey, it's like they say, when life gives you chains, you fight for your freedom, even if it means going out with a bang, or in this case, a roar. Chapter 5. Sexual Slavery and Prostitution. Roman nights, not so delightful. Roman brothels weren't just places for a quiet drink and a chat. They were more like amusement parks for adults, minus the cotton candy. These dens of desire were scattered all over the empire, offering a smorgasbord of pleasures for the discerning customer. And guess who was doing all the heavy lifting? Well, you got it. The slaves. Now let's not romanticize this. These slaves didn't choose this life. Many were forced into this harrowing profession, forced to cater to the desires of their masters and anyone else willing to part with some coin. But we're not here to judge. We're here to learn about history's most uncomfortable secrets. Picture this scene. The wealthy Roman elite lounging on plush couches, sipping wine and being fanned by feather-wielding servants. Meanwhile, the slaves were busy entertaining them in ways we won't go into detail about. This is a family-friendly show, after all. But it wasn't all glamour and intrigue. For the slaves, life in these brothels was far from pleasant. They lived in cramped, squalid quarters with no hope of freedom. They were often subjected to cruelty and abuse, both physical and emotional. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, it did. The Romans had an unsettling practice of breeding their own slaves, ensuring a steady supply of new entertainers. Imagine being born into a life where your destiny was set from day one. Tough gig, right? So, as we uncover this dark corner of Roman life, remember, it's not all gladiators and chariot races. Sometimes, history takes us to places we'd rather not visit, but it's essential to shed light on these unspeakable truths. And that's it from this video. If you enjoyed watching, then hit the like button. And also, subscribe for more content like this. And as always, thanks for watching.